All right. Good morning. My name is Kayleen of Loving Life with Light for another episode of Universal Astrology. It is September 2nd. It actually is September 2nd. It's Wednesday, ruled by Mercury. And the rulers being the same Mars, Jupiter, and the Sun. Oh boy, it is a fire day. 60 plus points in the fire category of element. Oh. And then we also we're in the negative for both earth and water. So they're not even in the game today. We're just dealing with fire, lots of fire, and about 18 points attributed to air quality. So there is quite a standout shape in the astrology of today that I'm going to cover. Let's make sure that I'm on point now. So we've got this trine. It's not a trine. I'll have to look up the exact title, but Mars is squaring over to Venus, and Venus is opposing Saturn. And we can see that on this aspect chart here. This right here. Okay. So, here, Mars squaring Saturn, okay, and Venus. Venus is squaring Mars and opposing Saturn. This geometry is pretty key for right now. Now, another interesting part of this is that this is happening at the gateway. And now in modern astrology, new age astrology, if you're in any kind of spiritual light group, modern spirituality, or classic spirituality, fire is that spiritual essence in the highest forms. And as an elemental level, earth really, at least in spiritual science, isn't really considered a primary element. The primary elements are fire, air, and water. And earth is a new element that's being added into the system that already exists. So to say Jupiter doesn't have any element of earth to it, and the influence of earth would be to Jupiter what Jupiter is to earth, in the way that it doesn't contain the element of earth, making earth not a primary element or even a spiritual element, but a base physical type element. So fire, air, and water is really where spiritual science takes into consideration as elements. Ether is kind of the above, as the earth is below of the elements. So we have earth and ether, which are considered elements, but one is considered a non-physical and one is considered a physical element, whereas the primary elements that kind of hold the system together being the three primary: fire, air, and water. So water isn't even in the game today, and we're just dealing with a lot of fire energy and a lot of air energy, and that's because of the position of the planets that are in home. Mars is at home in Aries. Sun is at home in Leo, and this is trining over to looks like Uranus in Aries. More fire, and Saturn is also in home in Capricorn, and Jupiter is at home in Sagittarius. So we have a lot of planets in their home sign. This is where they are in power. This is where their force is associated and attributed to when we're talking about the psychology, the human biology, the spiritual science assets that we contain. So these positions that the planets are in are powerful, and at least at this particular moment for this chart, which is 9:36 PST time. So that's 7 hours delayed from UTC. UTC time, this would be a chart looking at about 4 p.m. UTC time. So about this time, all this stuff is going to line up just perfectly at the gateways of the beginning of the zodiac. This gateway between Aries and Pisces is large, and we've got this gateway between Gemini, the twins, and Cancer, and Capricorn and Sagittarius. Now over here we've got to remember too that Sagittarius contains the galactic center. So this is a major gateway. This is a major position that these three outer planets are in, and even though they're not in alignment anymore, they're still bunched closer together. So let's take a moment and go out to the solar system and look at what this chart actually is in 3D. It's a bit bigger today. Okay. So this is solar system scope. It looks a little bit different than it typically does. This is the realistic mode, whereas normally we see them in large so we can see them and how pretty they are. But today we're going realistic so we can really see how perfectly aligned this stuff can be, and why it's relevant. So we can see that, earlier in 2020, these were all lined up in this powerful alignment in June, July. Particularly and even earlier in January. It's kind of they started to line up really well, and now they're kind of spreading out. And we also have another bunch here between Mars, Earth, and Ceres. These are pretty considered close together. And then we have some other alignments. If we look at this from a heliocentric view, meaning sun-centered, we've got Venus and Uranus lining up. Boom, Sun, Venus, Uranus. We also have Mercury can be in touch with any of these, but we also have a almost Venus is coming off an alignment with Mercury, Sun, so that's pretty. They're not quite in view of each other. Then we also have this to consider. Now, I think from a more science, purely science, not astrology, more not even astronomy view, but more of a helio solar system cosmology kind of view, relevant to space weather. When the sun pops off a CME, it starts out and then it grows and it grows and it grows and it spaces itself out and it gets larger and larger and larger. Now, if Earth gets hit with a straight on CME, it's bad news for us, and we have a magnetic field that is able to protect us. But by the time, say another CME happens out here and it grows and it grows and solar wind pushes it around, by the time if it hits one of them, it'll probably hit the others, and by then it'll be so massive that it just envelops all of them. And here's another interesting point that we definitely do know from a science perspective, is that we're all connected via the magnetic and electric lines of the sun. Now, there's probably a lot more to it, but the north and the south poles of all the planets and the sun do connect. The sun's field and influence is throughout this whole solar system. So everything is connected to the sun. And thus, everything is connected, period. Things that happen on Earth is impacted by the sun. Things that happen on Jupiter is impacted by the sun. And thus, the influence that Jupiter has on the sun, the Earth has on the sun, all these planets have on the sun, is also part of this thing. I believe in the sun, you know? So the triangle that we see in the chart today is between Mars, Venus, and Saturn. And we can see the geometry of this here. It's all happening around Earth. And if you look, this is actually very much an opposition between the three of these. We've got to remember that when we look at these astrology charts, Earth is at the center. So anything between an opposition, Earth is in between it. This is an opposition, but it's also an alignment between Venus, Earth, and Saturn. And Earth being matched up with Mars. And that's what we see here. Up with Mars and Saturn. Perfect. So if we look both directions here, not lining up perfectly with any of the stars in the system, but one thing that we also can concern ourselves with is the moon. We have this moon here that was at a full moon last night, and that might explain my just little bit of off yesterday, right? So that's a thing, right? And the moon is in the energy of Aquarius. Tropical horoscope, blah blah will tell you this moon was in this full moon was in Pisces. It wasn't. It was in Aquarius, facing towards Aquarius. I don't care what anybody else says, but it's real close. It's facing the backside of the dark side of the moon is facing the veil of Neptune, and I find that very interesting, considering this is very cuspy orientation to be between Aquarius and Pisces. Okay, so that's the kind of the importance of today's chart, is this Mars, Venus, Saturn. And if we translate that by using astrology, what that kind of means to us. Mars is again that action hero who is safe and secure and ready to go in Aries, ready for an adventure, ready to put the equipment on, gather the tools, and get to work. Venus in going from Gemini into Cancer. I'm sure Venus, the heart, would be happier in a feeling place more than a thinking place. So hopefully as we progress through this Cancer center, we'll be able to find our inner tune a little bit better as the sun goes through its efforts in Leo energy, which is its home planet. Like, this is summertime for many of us, although it's already starting to feel a little bit like fall is close, and because it's the next season and the loop. So we're here in the very, very center of this, just trying to get the most out of the summer as we possibly can, right before everything tries to quote quote go back to normal after the summertime. And there's a lot more to go back to normal that is really being questioned, and this is the time to question that. Because of this, Mercury is going to beat everyone else to that Virgo energy, to the fall energy. So many of us are thinking ahead. We're thinking ahead so much because Mercury is slightly ahead of the sun in our geo center. So we're thinking Earth, physical life. Many of us are taking steps that are more future oriented than they are currently now oriented when we find Mercury closer home in the sun, to the sun. Right now it's pretty, it's about as its max point away from the sun in the cycle before things start to kind of flip around in astrology. And then this Capricorn at 0 degrees, it is literally sitting on the gateway. Pluto and Sagittarius, Pluto and Jupiter are not far behind in Sagittarius. They are still very close to the central galactic sun. So any waves of influence from that outer space, they're so much closer to so much more energy than, say, Venus on the other side, closer to Cancer. A star being aligned to Venus would have much smaller effect because it's so much closer to the sun. Whereas if there's gamma rays and radiation and these flows of energy that come into our solar system, they're most likely coming from this direction. There's more potential for that because there's way more activity in local space over there. If we look at that way, so they're just more. There's a lot more over there. There's a lot more in the sky. Let's just do this real quick again. Okay. So these lines that I put on are, the sky is directional to Earth. So we can see that it's not perfectly above the sun. See here? Whereas south down here. So this is for Earth. Okay. And then, but we also have this other lines here guiding us through everything. The purple one is the ecliptic. It's going through the episodes of the zodiac, which I covered in a couple episodes previously, but that's seen as the purple line out there in the distance. And this green one, I believe, is the galactic plane. Let's see what it's called precisely. Whoa. Crashed. Anyways, this gives you guys some kind of a perspective about how big of a deal planets are in space and why it's relevant. Because we're all being impacted by the sun. We're all connected to the sun, and when we have these geometric alignments, it definitely has impacts. When energy and particles and all this stuff collides and interacts, that's where things get really, really interesting. In anything that you do, biology, chemistry, physics, it's just when things are closer together, things happen. And so that's definitely true for the planets in our solar system. So I definitely expect to see some activity today. Hopefully I'll be able to cover it a bit tomorrow in the episode, because I think there will be a lot more to hit on because of the activity that we are going to see today. That may be activity directly from the sun, say more CME impact, or just, over the next couple of days too. We already are expecting to come into some heavy storm and stuff that we saw in my later part of yesterday's episode. So on the 5th and the 6th, we're going to be coming into that. I think we're going to add more activity. This might be activity showing up that presents itself, physically on Earth, or it might be activity culturally. It might be activity spiritually on the inner worlds. We'll just have to wait and see, but I think there's definitely going to be more for me to cover tomorrow. So I will see you then. Thank you for being with me in these episodes, and I hope you have a fabulous day.